The sea was merciless that night. Waves crashed against the side of the luxury yacht, swallowing the silence with their violent roar. The sky, once a canvas of golden sunset, had turned into a furious storm. On deck, Isabella Tran clutched her swollen belly, her face pale, her breath shallow. She was 5 months pregnant, fragile yet fighting for every second of life. She thought this night was supposed to be a romantic escape planned by her husband, Marcus. Instead, it became the stage for her betrayal. Marcus stood only a few feet away, his expression colder than the wind that cut through Isabella's skin. Beside him, a woman with ruby lips and eyes filled with triumph, Vivian, watched with a smile that could pierce through bones. Isabella's heart shattered. She had suspected the affair, but she'd never imagined the man she trusted with her life would try to end it. Her voice trembled. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "I'm carrying your child." But Marcus did not flinch. He leaned closer, his words cruel and sharp. "That child means nothing to me. You mean nothing to me. Tonight, you disappear, and everything you built becomes mine." The storm seemed to rage louder, as if nature itself recoiled at his words. Isabella's tears mixed with the rain streaming down her face. She took a step back, terrified, her hands instinctively cradling her belly. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating Marcus's twisted smile. Then, without hesitation, he shoved her. The world spun in an instant. The sound of her scream was drowned by the ocean's roar as she plunged into the black abyss below. Freezing salt water wrapped around her body like chains, dragging her deeper and deeper. Her lungs burned as she struggled to breathe, panic flooding her every nerve. Her baby, her precious unborn baby, was all she could think of. She could not die. Not now. Above the waves, Marcus turned his back. Vivian's laughter echoed through the storm as the yacht sailed away, leaving Isabella to sink into darkness. For Marcus, it was done. His wife would be gone forever. His empire would be his. Vivian would be his queen. But the sea had its own plan. As Isabella's strength began to fade, her body drifting like a broken doll, a distant light pierced through the storm. A small fishing boat, guided by determination rather than luxury, cut across the violent waters. A man's voice shouted against the wind, urgent, desperate. "Hold on. Don't give up." Isabella's consciousness flickered. Through blurred vision, she saw him, a rugged fisherman with eyes fierce as the storm itself, diving into the water without hesitation. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her toward life when death was inches away. For the first time that night, hope touched Isabella's soul. And yet, Marcus had no idea that the woman he left to drown would rise again, stronger than ever, with justice burning in her heart. Before the storm, before the betrayal, Isabella Tran's life was the kind people envied from afar. She was the face of Tran Global Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire she had inherited and expanded with her sharp mind and relentless drive. Her name appeared on magazine covers, her speeches filled business halls, and her signature decisions shaped skylines across the city. At only 32, Isabella was a woman of extraordinary power. She sat in boardrooms surrounded by men twice her age, yet her voice carried more weight than any of them. Investors trusted her. Employees respected her. Rivals feared her. She was the kind of woman who could turn a failing project into a gold mine with nothing but determination and vision. Yet, behind the glass walls of her corporate empire, Isabella longed for something more intimate. Love, a family, a partner, who would stand beside her when the lights dimmed and the applause faded. That was why, when Marcus Nguyen walked into her life, she allowed herself to believe in him. He was charming, confident, and ambitious, the kind of man who seemed to complete the picture of her perfect life. She fell in love with him, blind to the shadows hidden behind his smile. They married in a lavish ceremony that the media called the wedding of the decade. Isabella thought she had it all: a thriving empire, a loving husband, and soon a child growing inside her. She imagined Marcus holding their baby, imagined quiet nights filled with laughter instead of business calls. Isabella's pregnancy brought her unexpected joy. She slowed down her endless meetings to attend doctor visits, proudly showed her growing belly at press events, and dreamed about decorating the nursery. For once, she allowed herself to be soft, to believe in the security of family. But even then, cracks had begun to show. Marcus grew distant, often disappearing for business trips that stretched too long. He snapped at Isabella's questions, brushed aside her concerns, and treated her pregnancy as an inconvenience rather than a blessing. Still, Isabella's heart refused to see the truth. She told herself he was stressed, that his moods were temporary, that once the baby came, things would change. She had no idea that Marcus had already decided their future, and it did not include her. Her wealth, her power, her empire, all of it had become a prize he could not resist. And standing in the shadows was Vivian, his secret lover, whispering poison into his ear, feeding his greed with promises of a life they could share once Isabella was gone. But Isabella, radiant in her strength and innocence, carried on, unaware. She planned their yacht trip as a chance to heal the distance between them. She bought new dresses, packed her favorite books, and smiled at the thought of watching the sunset with Marcus by her side. She was convinced it would be a new beginning. What she didn't know was that Marcus had chosen it to be the end. And when that yacht set sail, Isabella was walking straight into the trap that would change her life forever. Marcus Nguyen was the kind of man who could walk into any room and command attention without saying a word. Tall, sharply dressed, and quick with his charm, he gave off the aura of a devoted husband and accomplished businessman. To outsiders, he looked like Isabella's perfect match, a man who balanced her power with his quiet strength. He was photographed holding her hand at charity galas, whispering into her ear at red carpet events, smiling proudly as cameras flashed. But behind closed doors, Marcus was not the man the world believed him to be. He had grown up in the shadow of others, always chasing wealth he could never reach on his own. Meeting Isabella had been like striking gold. She wasn't just beautiful, she was powerful, rich, untouchable. To Marcus, marrying her wasn't about love, it was about access. Access to her empire, her influence, her fortune. In the beginning, he played his role well. He showered Isabella with affection, made grand gestures, and convinced her that he was the man she could trust. And Isabella, longing for love beyond her empire, gave him her heart without question. But once the vows were spoken and the wedding rings slid onto their fingers, Marcus's mask began to slip. He started living two lives. By day, he stood beside Isabella as the picture of loyalty. By night, he indulged in the arms of Vivian Lee, a woman as cunning as she was beautiful. Vivian was the fire that stoked his darkest desires. She whispered into his ear about how unfair it was that Isabella held all the power while he lived in her shadow. She teased him with the idea of what life could be if Isabella were gone, if the empire belonged to him, if the wealth flowed freely, if they could live as king and queen without anyone in their way. Marcus listened, and slowly his ambition turned into obsession. He grew colder toward Isabella, though he masked it in public. At home, he snapped at her, belittled her, and ignored her joy over the pregnancy. To him, the baby wasn't a gift, it was an obstacle, another tie that bound him to a woman he no longer wanted. The plan began to form in his mind like a dark seed. He knew Isabella trusted him completely. He knew she longed for his affection and would follow him anywhere if it meant saving their marriage. And so he crafted the perfect lie. A romantic yacht trip, a chance to rekindle what they once had. To Isabella, it was a gesture of love. To Marcus, it was the perfect cover for murder. He rehearsed the plan over and over in his mind. Push her. Watch her fall. Sail away as if nothing happened. With Isabella gone, he could inherit everything. No one would suspect the grieving husband. He would stand at her funeral, crocodile tears streaming, while the world offered him sympathy, and he would laugh inside knowing he had won. What Marcus never expected was that fate had a way of turning hunters into prey. And the woman he planned to erase would become the very storm that destroyed him. If Marcus was the mask of charm, then Vivian Le was the flame that burned away his restraint. She was the kind of woman who knew her beauty was a weapon and wielded it like a blade. With raven black hair cascading down her shoulders, eyes sharp as glass, and a smile that hinted at danger, Vivian didn't just walk into Marcus's life, she invaded it. Their first encounter had been at a lavish charity gala Isabella hosted. Vivian was there on the arm of a wealthy investor, draped in diamonds that sparkled under the chandeliers. Marcus noticed her instantly. Unlike Isabella, who carried herself with elegance and quiet dignity, Vivian radiated temptation. She laughed too loudly, held her gaze too long, and moved with a confidence that dared men to chase her. For Marcus, it was a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. That night, when Isabella mingled with politicians and business leaders, Marcus found himself cornered by Vivian in a shadowed hallway. Her words were bold, dripping with provocation. "You don't belong in her shadow. A man like you should be the king, not the servant." From that moment, their affair spiraled like wildfire. Vivian became the secret he couldn't give up. She fed his ego, stroked his pride, and poisoned his heart against the woman who trusted him. When Marcus vented about Isabella's strength, Vivian would sneer, "She thinks she owns you. Prove her wrong. Take what's yours." Vivian's greed was bottomless. She didn't want Marcus for love. She wanted Isabella's fortune, Isabella's empire, Isabella's life dismantled piece by piece. In Vivian's mind, the only way she and Marcus could ever rule together was if Isabella was gone. And so she became the whisper in his ear, the architect of betrayal. At secret dinners and hotel suites, Vivian would draw imaginary crowns in the air and laugh softly. "Picture it," she told Marcus. "You, the head of Tran Global Holdings, me by your side, no one to question us, no one to hold us back." Marcus drank in her words like poison disguised as wine. Every time he hesitated, Vivian pressed harder, reminding him of the fortune that could be his, the power he could seize, the life he could live if only Isabella disappeared. And when Isabella announced her pregnancy, Vivian's mask slipped entirely. Her fury boiled over. "She's chaining you to her forever," she spat. "If that child is born, you'll never be free. Don't you see? It's now or never, Marcus." That was the night the plan solidified. Marcus promised Vivian that he would end it, that Isabella would no longer stand in their way. And Vivian kissed him like a queen crowning her king, her eyes glinting with victory. But Vivian underestimated one thing: Isabella's resilience. She saw her only as an obstacle, not as a woman whose spirit could withstand betrayal and rise stronger. And when the storm came, Vivian would learn that stealing a crown from a queen always comes with a price far greater than gold. The invitation had come unexpectedly. Marcus walked into Isabella's office one late afternoon, his voice unusually soft, his expression carefully arranged into something resembling tenderness. "You've been working too hard," he told her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Let's get away, just the two of us. A yacht trip. We'll watch the sunset, escape the noise, and remember why we fell in love." For Isabella, those words were like rain on parched soil. She had been aching for Marcus to notice her, to see beyond the titles and meetings and wealth. She thought maybe, just maybe, her husband was finally reaching for her again. Her heart swelled with hope as she imagined them sailing into the horizon, leaving behind the tension that had quietly eroded their marriage. She spent the following week preparing, her joy renewed. Dresses were carefully folded into silk-lined luggage, her favorite books tucked beside baby clothes she had secretly bought. She even brought along the tiny silver rattle she'd chosen for their child, dreaming of the day Marcus would hold it with pride. On the day of departure, the yacht gleamed like a jewel against the harbor. Staff rushed to and fro, loading champagne, exotic fruits, and delicacies onto the deck. Isabella stepped aboard in a flowing white dress, her hand instinctively resting on her growing belly. She looked radiant, glowing not just from her pregnancy, but from the hope that love was about to be reborn. Marcus, meanwhile, played his role flawlessly. He kissed her cheek in front of the crew, whispered sweet nothings into her ear, and held her hand as though nothing in the world mattered but her. To Isabella, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter. But Marcus's heart was elsewhere. In the shadows of the cabin, Vivian waited. Disguised as a guest of a business partner, she had boarded the yacht under the pretense of joining later for cocktails. Her lips curled into a smile as she watched Isabella from a distance, her eyes sharp, her voice dripping with contempt when she whispered to Marcus, "Tonight, she disappears. No more delays." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded. His plan was simple, elegant, and final. The storm forecasted for the evening was a gift from fate. All he needed to do was lure Isabella onto the deck, let the waves mask her screams, and push her into the abyss. By the time the crew noticed she was gone, it would be too late. Isabella, oblivious, leaned against the railing as the yacht set sail. The wind tugged gently at her hair. The sea shimmered in the fading light, and her heart whispered promises of reconciliation. She believed Marcus was finally hers again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus approached her, his footsteps steady, his smile practiced. Isabella turned toward him, her eyes glowing with trust. She whispered, "This feels like a new beginning." But for Marcus, it was meant to be her end. The evening unfolded like a dream Isabella had waited months to live. Dinner was served on the yacht's polished deck, candlelight flickering against the restless waves. The chef had prepared her favorite meal, grilled salmon with lemon butter, yet Isabella hardly tasted a bite. Her attention was fixed on Marcus, who for the first time in months seemed to look at her the way he once had. He held her hand across the table, lifted her glass of sparkling water for a toast, and leaned close enough that she could feel his breath against her cheek. "To us," he whispered, raising his glass. Her heart leapt. Maybe, she thought, the cold distance between them had finally melted. Maybe the man she married had returned. She wanted to believe it so badly that she ignored the chill in his eyes, the stiffness in his smile. After dinner, Marcus suggested they take a walk on the upper deck. The storm clouds had gathered, but the air was strangely calm, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Isabella wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed him, her steps light, her soul full of fragile hope. They stopped at the railing. The sea stretched endlessly into the night, black and bottomless. Marcus stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. For a fleeting second, she thought he was about to embrace her. Instead, he leaned down, his lips grazing her ear. "You've had a good run, Isabella," he murmured, his voice colder than the wind. Her body froze. What do you mean?" she stammered, turning slightly to meet his gaze. The mask slipped. Gone was the doting husband, the man she thought she had married. In his place stood a stranger, his eyes hard, his mouth twisted with cruelty. "You really thought I loved you?" Marcus sneered. "You were a stepping stone, that's all. Your money, your empire, your name. Without you, I was nothing. With you gone, I'll have everything." Isabella's stomach clenched, not from her pregnancy but from the sickening realization of what he meant. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Marcus, please, I'm carrying your child," she begged, her voice cracking. "You can't." He cut her off with a sharp laugh. "That child? Just another chain tying me to you. I don't want it. I don't want you. Tonight, both of you disappear." Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head, backing away toward the railing. Her hands clutched her belly protectively. "You don't mean this. You can't mean this." But Marcus stepped closer, his movements deliberate, his shadow swallowing hers. Thunder cracked overhead as lightning lit his face, twisted, determined, merciless. Her voice broke into a whisper. "How could you?" He leaned in, his breath hot against her cheek, and hissed, easily. And with one brutal motion he shoved her against the railing. The scream that tore from Isabella's throat was ripped away by the storm. Her body teetered, her feet slipping on the slick deck as she clung desperately to the railing with trembling hands. Her eyes widened in horror, staring into the face of the man she once believed would protect her forever. And in that instant, Isabella realized Marcus wasn't just betraying her love, he was stealing her life. The shove came harder than Isabella could have imagined. 1 second, she was clinging to the railing with all her strength, her knuckles white, her heart pounding. The next, Marcus's hand struck with brutal force, and her grip slipped. Her scream split the night, but the storm swallowed it whole. The world flipped upside down as Isabella's body plunged into the freezing water. The impact stole the air from her lungs, her entire body jolting from the shock. Salt water flooded her mouth, her throat burning as she kicked desperately, trying to keep herself afloat. The weight of her soaked dress dragged her downward, pulling her like an anchor toward the dark abyss below. Instinct screamed at her to fight. For herself. For her baby. She thrashed her arms, gasping, her chest searing with pain as she struggled to breathe. Each wave that crashed over her felt like a wall, pressing her deeper into despair. Above her, the yacht sailed away. Its lights shimmered faintly through the rain, growing smaller with each second, until it became nothing more than a ghostly glow swallowed by the storm. Marcus never looked back. Vivian's laughter, cruel and triumphant, lingered in Isabella's ears as though the sea itself had recorded it. Panic clawed at her chest. She was alone, pregnant, exhausted. The ocean was merciless, tossing her like a rag doll, pulling her under again and again. Every time she surfaced, she gasped violently, salt water tearing into her lungs. Her arms trembled, her legs burned, her belly ached as she whispered through chattering teeth, "Please, not my baby, please." Her vision blurred as tears mixed with rain. She thought of the nursery she never finished, the lullabies she had hummed while placing her hands on her stomach, the tiny silver rattle packed in her bag. She thought of the life inside her, innocent and undeserving of this cruelty. Lightning flashed, and in that instant, Isabella saw her reflection in the water, a fragile figure fighting against a sea too vast to conquer. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly powerless, not as a CEO, not as a woman of influence, just as a mother trying desperately to live. Her strength waned. Her body grew heavy. Darkness pressed against her mind, whispering that it would be easier to let go, to sink into the quiet embrace of the ocean. But then, a thought cut through the fog. This child needs me. With every ounce of will she had left, Isabella forced her arms to move, clawing toward the faint rhythm of waves, refusing to surrender. Yet the storm was relentless, dragging her under once more. Her lungs screamed for air as blackness closed in. The last thing she saw was a faint light flickering in the distance, like a star breaking through the storm. And just as Isabella's strength gave out, that light grew closer. A sign that fate was not ready to let her die. The storm raged with merciless fury, waves towering like walls of black water. For most sailors, it was a night to avoid the ocean, to seek refuge on land. But Ethan Pham was not most sailors. A fisherman born and raised by the sea, he knew its moods, its dangers, and its secrets. That night, while guiding his small boat through the violent waters, his sharp eyes caught sight of something unusual, a figure thrashing desperately against the tide. At first, he thought it was debris tossed overboard. But then lightning split the sky, and he saw her, Isabella, her pale face half submerged, her arms flailing weakly, her body moments from sinking. Ethan's heart pounded. "Hold on!" he shouted into the storm, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Without hesitation, he cut the engine, stripped off his jacket, and dove into the freezing water. The ocean swallowed him instantly, pulling at his limbs with the strength of 1,000 hands. But he kicked harder, his focus locked on the fragile woman drifting further into the abyss. The salt burned his eyes, the cold bit into his skin, but nothing mattered except reaching her. With each stroke, the distance between them closed. He could see her face now, eyes half closed, lips trembling, her body limp as though surrendering to the waves. "No, not yet!" Ethan roared against the storm. Finally, he reached her. Wrapping his arm firmly around her chest, he pulled her head above the water. Her breath came in broken gasps, each one weaker than the last. He could feel the weight of her soaked dress dragging them both down, but he refused to let go. "Stay with me," he shouted, tightening his grip. "Don't give up. You're not alone." With powerful strokes, Ethan fought his way back toward the boat. Each wave threatened to tear her from his arms, each current tried to pull them under. But Ethan's resolve was unshakable. He had seen too many lives lost to the sea. He would not let this woman and her unborn child be another. At last, his hand grasped the side of his boat. Summoning every ounce of strength, he hauled Isabella aboard, collapsing beside her as rain hammered the deck. She lay motionless, her skin icy, her lips blue. Panic surged through him. "No, no, no, not like this," Ethan muttered, pressing his hands to her chest. He performed chest compressions, desperate to coax life back into her fragile body. "Breathe. Please breathe." Seconds stretched into eternity. Then a cough, a violent, wet gasp as seawater poured from her mouth. Isabella's chest heaved as air returned to her lungs. Tears blurred Ethan's vision as relief washed over him. That's it, keep breathing," he whispered, brushing the wet hair from her face. She blinked, dazed, her voice barely audible as she whispered, "My baby?" Ethan placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now, both of you. I promise." And though the storm still raged around them, a fragile spark of hope flickered in the darkness. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night would bind their fates forever. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the sea eerily calm, as if mocking the chaos it had unleashed only hours before. Ethan's small fishing boat drifted toward the shore, its deck still slick with rain and salt water. Inside the tiny cabin, Isabella lay wrapped in a blanket, her body trembling from the cold, her breath shallow but steady. Ethan sat nearby, watching over her like a guardian. His rugged hands, calloused from years of hauling nets, had gently pulled the soaked dress from her shoulders and replaced it with dry clothes from his storage chest. He had lit a small lantern, its golden glow flickering across her pale face. When her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouded her gaze. She tried to sit up but winced in pain, one hand instinctively covering her belly. Panic surged through her as memories flooded back. The yacht, Marcus's cruel smile, Vivian's mocking laugh, the shove, the fall. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "My baby, is my baby still?" Ethan leaned forward quickly, his tone steady, reassuring. "I checked. Your heartbeat is strong and so is the baby's. You're both alive." Tears spilled from Isabella's eyes, a mix of relief and anguish. She pressed her palm firmly to her belly, whispering, "Thank you, thank you." Her shoulders shook as sobs broke free, the weight of betrayal crushing her chest. Ethan said nothing at first. He understood the language of silence, the kind of grief that words could not soothe. He simply sat beside her, letting her cry, his presence solid and unyielding. Minutes passed before she finally looked at him, her eyes searching his. Why did you save me?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Because you needed saving. That's reason enough." Those words, simple and raw, struck her harder than any flowery promise Marcus had ever made. She studied him, the rough stubble along his jaw, the steady strength in his eyes, the way he carried himself with quiet dignity. He was nothing like the polished men in her world, yet in that moment he felt more real, more human than anyone she had ever known. Still, despair lingered like a shadow. "He wanted me dead," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The man I trusted with everything. He pushed me into the sea like I was nothing, and I loved him. God, I loved him." Ethan clenched his fists, anger flashing across his face. "Then he doesn't deserve to walk free. A man who betrays his wife, his unborn child, he's no man at all." Isabella lowered her gaze, tears dripping onto the blanket. She felt broken, stripped of the illusions that had once given her comfort. Yet beneath the pain, a seed of determination stirred. She had survived. Her child had survived. And somewhere deep inside, she knew survival was only the beginning. Ethan placed a hand gently over hers. "Rest now. You're safe here. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." But Isabella knew tomorrow wouldn't just be about survival. It would be about justice. Back in the city, news spread like wildfire. The beloved CEO of Tran Global Holdings, Isabella Tran, had gone missing at sea. The official report was vague, a tragic accident during a yacht trip. The Coast Guard claimed the storm made rescue impossible. Her body had not been recovered, but the chances of survival were slim. To the world, Isabella was gone. Marcus played the grieving husband flawlessly. Cameras flashed as he stood before reporters, dressed in a black suit, his head bowed, his voice breaking with rehearsed sorrow. "My wife, she was the light of my life," he said, dabbing at his dry eyes with a handkerchief. "This tragedy is more than I can bear." The public ate it up. Headlines read, "CEO Isabella Tran lost at sea. Husband mourns nation's business icon." Behind closed doors, Marcus reveled in his victory. Vivian sat curled against him in the penthouse suite, sipping champagne as they watched the coverage on television. She smirked, her red lips curling with satisfaction. "You're brilliant," she purred, resting her head on his shoulder. "No one suspects a thing. Soon, the empire will be yours." Marcus's grin was sharp, almost feral. "Ours," he corrected, raising his glass. "Isabella built the fortune, but we'll enjoy it." Step by step, Marcus moved to secure his claim. He summoned Isabella's legal team, feigning devastation as he discussed her last wishes. He insisted she had always wanted him to take control if anything happened to her. The lawyers, sympathetic to the broken man before them, began drafting documents to transfer authority. At Tran Global's headquarters, employees whispered in grief. Isabella had been more than a boss. She had been a leader, a mentor, a visionary. Her portrait, draped in black ribbon, stood in the lobby. Marcus walked through the halls with heavy footsteps, his face the picture of mourning. But in the boardroom, his mask slipped. "We move forward immediately," he declared to the directors, his tone sharp. "Isabella would have wanted stability. From this moment, I will assume control." Some executives shifted uncomfortably. A few exchanged glances, sensing something amiss. But Marcus silenced them with a practiced speech about honoring Isabella's legacy. He played the role of the dutiful widower determined to keep her dreams alive, and for the most part, people believed him. At night, however, the facade crumbled into greed. Marcus and Vivian toasted to their new life, laughing at the world that pitied them. Vivian tried on diamond necklaces Isabella once wore, twirling in front of the mirror. Marcus opened drawers filled with documents, reviewing the assets he now controlled. "We did it," Vivian whispered, pressing her lips to his. "She's gone, forever." Marcus smirked, sliding his arms around her. "And soon, no one will even remember her name." But across the sea, in a humble fisherman's cottage, Isabella stirred in her sleep, her heart beating strong, her child still safe within her. She was alive. And when the truth came out, Marcus would learn that the dead don't stay silent forever. The fisherman's cottage was a world apart from the glittering skyscrapers and glass boardrooms Isabella once commanded. It sat on the edge of a quiet coastal village, its wooden walls weathered by years of sea winds, its windows overlooking endless waves. For days, Isabella remained in the small bed Ethan had prepared for her, wrapped in thick quilts, her body fragile but slowly recovering. At first, her sleep was restless. She would wake in the night, drenched in sweat, Marcus's voice echoing in her mind, "Tonight, you disappear." She would jolt upright, clutching her belly, her breath shallow, fear clawing at her chest. Ethan would be there, every time, steady as stone. He would bring her water, sit at her side, and speak softly until the terror faded. "You're safe here," he told her one night, his voice calm against the storm inside her. "No one will hurt you again." But safety didn't erase the pain. Isabella carried two truths inside her. She was alive, and the man she loved had wanted her dead. That betrayal cut deeper than the waves ever could. Tears came without warning, sometimes in the morning sun, sometimes in the quiet of night. She grieved not only for her marriage, but for the trust, the illusions, and the love she had buried at sea. Still, there was life growing within her, reminding her that surrender was not an option. Each time she felt the faint flutter of her baby's kicks, strength surged through her veins. She would place her hand on her stomach and whisper, "I'm still here. We're still here." Ethan noticed that strength. He saw it in the way she sat longer each day, her back straighter, her eyes clearer. He brought her fresh meals, warm soups, grilled fish, fruits from the market, and urged her to walk along the shore to regain her energy. At first, she resisted, afraid of the sea that had nearly claimed her. But one evening, he coaxed her outside. The sand was cool beneath her bare feet, the waves lapping gently as if apologizing for their rage. Isabella stood at the water's edge, trembling, but Ethan's hand was firm in hers. "The ocean took much from you," he said quietly, "but it also gave you another chance. Don't let fear steal that from you." His words sank deep. She realized he was right. The sea hadn't only been her enemy, it had also delivered her into the arms of the man who had saved her. As days turned into weeks, Isabella found herself confiding in Ethan. She told him about Marcus, about Vivian, about the empire she had built with her own hands. Ethan listened without judgment, his silence carrying more comfort than 1,000 empty reassurances. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Isabella looked at Ethan and whispered, "You saved my life. But more than that, you reminded me it's worth fighting for." And in that moment, Isabella began to see herself not as a victim of betrayal, but as a woman reborn from the storm. In the weeks following Isabella's death, Marcus Nguyen wasted no time weaving himself deeper into her empire. Tran Global Holdings, once guided by Isabella's sharp vision and steady hand, now bent under the weight of Marcus's ambition. He began by reshuffling the board of directors, replacing those loyal to Isabella with men eager to please him. He signed off on risky deals she would have never approved, hungry for quick profits that fed his ego more than the company's future. Under his reign, extravagance replaced discipline. Lavish parties were thrown in her memory, but the guest lists included investors and socialites who cared little for mourning and more for Marcus's growing influence. In public, Marcus wore the mask of grief. He spoke at charity events about Isabella's legacy, his voice cracking on cue, his hand clutching his chest as if his heart still bled for her. Reporters captured him placing white roses by her portrait in the headquarters lobby, his jaw tight with rehearsed sorrow. But behind closed doors, Marcus celebrated. Vivian now lived openly in the penthouse Isabella once called home. She lounged on Isabella's silk sofas, wore Isabella's diamonds, and strutted through the halls as though she already owned the empire. "You see?" Vivian whispered one night, tracing her fingers along Marcus's chest as they overlooked the glittering city skyline. "The world believes every word you say. Isabella is gone, and you are king." Marcus smirked, sipping his glass of whiskey. "No, Vivian, we are king and queen." Yet cracks had begun to form. At Tran Global, a few executives murmured uneasily. They had known Isabella too well, admired her too deeply, to fully believe the story. "She was cautious," one whispered in the break room. "She never would have risked sailing into a storm." Another frowned. "Her body's never been found? Doesn't that bother you?" The questions were quiet, drowned out by Marcus's authority, but they lingered like smoke after a fire. Even outside the company, whispers stirred. Some journalists, unsatisfied with the official report, began digging into the night of the accident. One, a young investigative reporter named Daniel Cho, noticed discrepancies. Crew members dismissed unusually quickly, logs missing from the yacht, Marcus's alibi too perfectly rehearsed. Daniel's instincts screamed that something was wrong. When he requested an interview with Marcus, the widower's charm cracked for the first time. Marcus's eyes darkened as he snapped, "My wife is dead, and you dare imply otherwise? Leave it alone, or you'll regret it." But arrogance made Marcus careless. His need for control, his hunger for admiration, it blinded him to the storm gathering beneath the surface. One evening, as he toasted investors in the very boardroom Isabella once commanded, he leaned back in her chair, Vivian at his side, and declared, "The future is ours." Isabella's chapter is closed. But fate was already writing a new chapter, one Marcus could never control, because the woman he buried in the sea was alive, and her return would shatter his stolen crown. The days in the coastal village stretched into weeks, each one a fragile step between despair and strength. Isabella had survived the storm, but survival was not enough. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face, his smirk as he pushed her, his voice dripping with venom. "Tonight, you disappear." She could have vanished quietly, built a new life in hiding, far from the corruption of wealth and betrayal. But Isabella was not made for silence. She had built an empire from the ground up. She had carried thousands of employees on her shoulders, fought battles in boardrooms, and won. She would not allow a man like Marcus to steal everything. Not her company, not her child, not her dignity. One morning she stood at the shoreline, the wind whipping her hair, her hand resting firmly on her belly. Ethan watched from a distance, his arms crossed, his gaze steady. He had seen the fire in her grow stronger each day, and now it blazed in her eyes. She turned to him, her voice low but firm. "I can't stay hidden anymore. He thinks I'm dead. He's taking everything I built. He's poisoning my name." Her voice cracked, but she held herself tall. "I have to go back." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "You're not ready to face him, not yet. You're still healing." Her lips trembled, but determination stiffened her spine. "I'm healing because of you, because you reminded me I still have something to fight for. This baby," she placed her hand protectively over her belly, "deserves to know their mother didn't give up." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to protect her from the pain, from the danger, from the storm she was walking into. But he also knew he couldn't chain her to safety when her soul demanded justice. "I'll stand with you," he said finally, his voice steady. "Whatever it takes, you're not facing him alone." For the first time in weeks, Isabella allowed herself a faint smile. Gratitude shimmered in her tear-filled eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to," Ethan replied, his tone quiet but unwavering. "Just live. That's enough." That night, Isabella sat at the small wooden table in Ethan's cottage, a single candle burning between them. She took a notebook and began writing. Names of board members she could trust, allies who might still believe in her, evidence she remembered from that night. Her hands shook, but her resolve did not. Every stroke of the pen was a vow. She would expose Marcus. She would reveal Vivian's role. She would reclaim her throne. And as the candle flickered, Isabella whispered to herself, "I may have been broken, but I am not finished." Ethan, watching from across the table, saw not just a survivor, but a queen rising from the ashes of betrayal. And when she returned to the world Marcus thought he controlled, she would no longer be the woman he tried to drown. She would be the storm. Marcus Nian had always prided himself on control. He believed he had orchestrated Isabella's disappearance flawlessly. No witnesses, no evidence, no body. To the world she was gone, and he was the grieving widower poised to inherit everything. But perfection has a way of unraveling, and Marcus was about to discover that even the most careful plans leave shadows. It began with whispers. A maid at the penthouse mentioned hearing Marcus argue with Isabella before the yacht trip. A deckhand, dismissed suddenly after the voyage, hinted that something about that night felt wrong. Nothing concrete, just murmurs. But murmurs spread, and soon Marcus felt eyes on him wherever he went. At Tran Global Holdings, directors once eager to embrace him now exchanged uneasy glances. "She was too cautious to take that yacht into a storm," one muttered during a board meeting. Another frowned at Marcus's aggressive spending, whispering, "Is this what Isabella would have wanted?" Marcus silenced them with his usual charm, but the doubts lodged like splinters. And then came the journalist. Daniel Cho, a young reporter with a reputation for persistence, had been digging into the so-called accident. One afternoon, he cornered Marcus outside the company's headquarters. Cameras clicked as Daniel raised his voice. "Mr. Nguyen, can you explain why the yacht's logs for that night are missing, or why several crew members have refused to speak?" Marcus's jaw tightened, the mask of sorrow slipping for the briefest moment. He forced a smile, his tone calm but edged. "My wife is dead, Mr. Cho. Show some respect." He walked away, but inside, his chest burned with unease. That night, in the penthouse, Marcus poured himself a glass of scotch, pacing furiously. Vivian lounged on the sofa, rolling her eyes. "You're overthinking," she said, her voice smooth. "She's gone. The sea doesn't give back what it takes." But Marcus wasn't so sure. He had seen Isabella fight before. In the boardroom, in negotiations, in life itself. She wasn't the kind of woman who surrendered easily. And though he had pushed her into the waves, the thought haunted him. What if she survived? Every creak of the floorboards, every knock at the door, every shadow in the corner seemed to mock him. He woke at night, drenched in sweat, imagining her standing at the foot of his bed, dripping with seawater, her eyes burning with vengeance. Vivian tried to soothe him, but her words only fed his paranoia. "Even if she did survive," she said one evening, twirling a diamond necklace around her fingers, "what could she do? She has nothing, no allies, no power." Marcus stared out the window at the glittering city below, his reflection fractured in the glass. He whispered to himself, "Unless she comes back for everything." The thought made his blood run cold. And though Marcus didn't know it yet, far from the penthouse's luxury, Isabella was already preparing her return, each day bringing her closer to the reckoning he feared most. Vivian Leigh had always believed she was untouchable. She was beautiful, cunning, and ruthless, the kind of woman who could bend men to her will with nothing more than a glance. When Marcus promised her the world, she believed him. Together, they would wear Isabella's crown, sit on Isabella's throne, and live the life of kings and queens. At first, everything had gone according to plan. Isabella was declared dead, the empire fell into Marcus's hands, and Vivian slipped into the role of his hidden queen. She wore Isabella's jewels, drank champagne in Isabella's penthouse, and walked through Isabella's offices as if she already owned them. For a while it felt intoxicating. But power built on lies is fragile, and Vivian was beginning to feel the cracks. It started with the whispers, directors doubting Marcus's decisions, employees murmuring that Isabella's death didn't add up. Then came the journalists, like vultures circling, hungry for the truth. Vivian noticed how Marcus grew restless, snapping at the smallest things, pacing at night like a man haunted. One evening, she watched him from the doorway as he stared at his reflection in the mirror, muttering under his breath. His glass of scotch trembled in his hand. "She's gone," Vivian reminded him, stepping closer. "You killed her. She's not coming back." But Marcus didn't answer. His silence chilled her more than words could. For the first time, Vivian felt fear. She had thrown her lot entirely with Marcus, burned every bridge behind her. If he fell, she would fall too. And unlike Marcus, she didn't have an empire to cushion her landing. She had nothing, no company, no fortune of her own, only borrowed diamonds and stolen promises. Her dreams of ruling beside Marcus began to twist into nightmares. What if the truth came out? What if Isabella had survived? What if the police started asking questions they couldn't answer? That night, as Marcus pored over documents in the study, Vivian confronted him. "You're slipping," she hissed. "The board is watching you. The press is watching you. If you don't get yourself together, they'll smell blood." Marcus slammed his fist against the desk, his eyes blazing. "I handled it. She's gone. The sea took her. No one survives that storm." Vivian flinched at his fury, but she wasn't convinced. Her instincts, sharp and self-serving, whispered that Marcus was no longer the strong partner she once admired. He was unraveling, and if he collapsed, she would be buried with him. So Vivian began to think of herself. She secretly contacted an attorney, asking discreet questions about her rights, about what protection she might have if Marcus faced accusations. She started hiding money, transferring small sums into accounts Marcus didn't know about. She told herself it was just insurance, but deep down, she knew the truth. She was preparing to abandon him the moment the empire crumbled. Because for all her love of power, Vivian loved only herself. And when the storm of truth finally broke, Vivian would discover that standing on a throne of betrayal means there's no one to catch you when you fall. Weeks of silence had hardened into resolve. Isabella was no longer the broken woman dragged from the sea, trembling in a stranger's arms. She had healed, slowly but surely, her strength returning with every breath, every step, every beat of her child's growing heart. Ethan watched the transformation with awe. The fragile survivor he had pulled from the waves was gone. In her place stood the Isabella Tran the world had once known, a leader, a warrior, a queen. But this time, her power was sharper, forged by betrayal and loss. One evening, she stood before the cracked mirror in Ethan's cottage, her hands smoothing the simple dress she wore. Her face was pale but fierce, her eyes blazing with a fire Marcus could never extinguish. "I'm ready," she said quietly, more to herself than to Ethan. "Ready for what?" he asked, though he already knew. "To show the world I'm alive," Isabella replied, her voice steady. "Marcus thinks he buried me, but I will bury his lies." Ethan's brow furrowed. "It's dangerous. He'll try to silence you." She turned, meeting his gaze with unshakable determination. "Let him try. I survived the sea. I survived him. I'll survive whatever comes next." The plan was simple but bold. Isabella reached out to Daniel Cho, the young journalist who had been digging into her disappearance. Using an encrypted phone Ethan had helped her acquire, she sent him a message. "Meet me, alone. The truth is bigger than you imagine." When Daniel arrived at the quiet coastal cafe the next day, his jaw nearly dropped. "My God," he whispered, staring at her in disbelief. "You're alive." "I am," Isabella said firmly, "and I'm ready to take everything back." She told him everything. The yacht, Marcus's betrayal, Vivian's involvement, the storm. Daniel listened intently, recording her words, his hands trembling with the weight of the story. "When the world hears this," he said, "Marcus won't stand a chance." But Isabella wasn't content with whispers in the press. She wanted to confront Marcus publicly, strip him of his mask in the very arena where he had thrived. So she chose the boardroom. A week later, Tran Global Holdings announced a memorial meeting in Isabella's honor, arranged by Marcus himself. Investors, directors, and media gathered in the gleaming glass tower, ready to mourn the woman they thought they had lost. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his grief carefully painted on his face, Vivian at his side in black silk. And then the doors opened. Gasps echoed through the room as Isabella stepped inside, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She wore no jewels, no extravagant gown, just a simple black dress, her posture regal, her gaze unyielding. Marcus froze, his glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. Vivian's lips parted, her face draining of color. "Hello, Marcus," Isabella said, her voice calm but cutting through the silence like a blade. "Did you miss me?" And in that instant, the empire Marcus thought he controlled began to crumble, because the queen he tried to kill had returned to claim her throne. The silence that followed Isabella's entrance was deafening. Men and women who had built their careers under her leadership sat frozen in disbelief, eyes wide, breaths caught in their throats. For weeks they had mourned her, whispered prayers for her soul, and resigned themselves to Marcus's rule. Now she stood before them, very much alive, radiating strength. Marcus was the first to break, his face contorted, shifting between shock, fear, and fury. He tried to recover, forcing a smile that fell flat. "Isabella, my God, you're alive." He stepped toward her, his voice dripping with false relief. "We thought we lost you. Everyone grieved." "Save it," Isabella cut him off, her voice sharp and steady. "You didn't lose me, Marcus. You tried to kill me." A collective gasp rippled through the room. All eyes swung back to Marcus. His mask cracked, his smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I would never." Isabella stepped forward, her gaze locked on him. "On that yacht during the storm you pushed me into the sea. You left me to drown, Marcus, and you did it for greed. For her." She turned her head, her eyes piercing Vivian like arrows. Vivian's face drained of color, her grip tightening on the table's edge. Whispers spread like wildfire through the boardroom. Cameras flashed as journalists scribbled furiously, capturing every word. Marcus laughed nervously, raising his hands as though calming children. "She's confused, traumatized. The storm, it must have affected her memory." Isabella slammed her hand on the table, her voice ringing like thunder. "My memory is crystal clear. You betrayed me. You betrayed your own child." Her hand instinctively touched her belly, a silent reminder to everyone present of the unborn life Marcus had tried to erase. The directors shifted uncomfortably, doubt flickering in their eyes. They had seen Marcus's arrogance, his reckless decisions. Now, hearing Isabella's words, puzzle pieces began to align. Daniel Cho, the young journalist Isabella had confided in, stood at the back of the room. He raised his camera, snapping photo after photo, capturing the moment history shifted. Vivian tried to salvage control. She stepped forward, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Isabella, darling, you've been through so much. You don't know what you're saying." "Don't you dare," Isabella snapped, her eyes blazing. "You were there, Vivian. You laughed as Marcus pushed me overboard. You thought the storm would silence me forever. But here I am." Vivian froze, words dying on her lips. Her silence was louder than any denial. The board erupted in murmurs. Some rose to their feet, others turned accusing eyes toward Marcus. His face twisted in rage, the walls of his carefully built deception collapsing around him. "You wanted my empire," Isabella continued, her voice steady, commanding. "You thought killing me would make you king, but TranGlobal was built on integrity, not betrayal, and today the truth takes its throne back." As Marcus's mask crumbled, Isabella stood tall, no longer the victim of his betrayal, but the queen reclaiming her crown before the world's eyes. The boardroom descended into chaos. Directors murmured frantically, investors demanded answers, and cameras flashed as Isabella's accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Marcus's carefully constructed facade cracked wide open, his mask of grief disintegrating before dozens of witnesses. He slammed his fist on the table, his voice booming. "Lies! All lies. She's twisting the truth because she knows she's lost control of this company." But no one looked convinced. The board members who once nodded obediently at his commands now shifted away, their eyes darting between Isabella's calm presence and Marcus's unraveling rage. The contrast was damning. Isabella stood tall, dignified, her voice unwavering. Marcus looked desperate, cornered, dangerous. Vivian, sensing the walls closing in, tried to intervene. She rose from her chair, her tone syrupy but trembling. "This is madness. Isabella must be delusional from trauma. We all mourned her. Marcus mourned her. He would never harm her." Isabella's eyes locked on Vivian's, sharp as glass. "Then explain this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a waterproof folder Ethan had helped her prepare. Inside were photos, documents, and recordings, evidence Daniel Cho had uncovered during his investigation. She spread them across the table like a dealer laying down cards. The room fell silent as the evidence spoke louder than words. Bank transfers from Marcus to offshore accounts. Testimonies from dismissed crew members who admitted they'd been paid for their silence. Security footage of Marcus and Vivian entering the yacht together hours before departure. Vivian disguised but unmistakable. Gasps echoed around the room. One director muttered, "My God." Another whispered, "She's telling the truth." Vivian's face went white. She lunged forward, snatching at the papers. "These are fabricated," she shouted, her voice shrill, desperate. "You can't trust this." "Sit down," one of the senior board members snapped, his voice thunderous. "Enough lies." Marcus's composure shattered completely. He pointed at Isabella, his finger trembling with fury. "You should have stayed dead. Do you hear me? You should have stayed in the ocean where you belong." The room erupted in outrage. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras caught every word, every crack in his mask. The world would see this not as grief, but as confession. Isabella didn't flinch. She met his rage with icy calm. "You failed to kill me, Marcus. And now you've killed your own future." Vivian, realizing Marcus was beyond saving, tried to pull away from him. "I won't go down for this," she hissed, stepping back. But Marcus grabbed her wrist, yanking her close. "You're in this with me?" he growled. "Don't you dare run now." The board members recoiled. Security guards began moving toward the pair. Vivian struggled, tears smearing her mascara. "Let me go, Marcus. I never wanted this." But her words were too late. The evidence was undeniable. The empire had chosen its queen, and it was not Vivian. As Marcus's empire collapsed around him, Isabella stood unshaken. Proof that truth, once revealed, can destroy even the most carefully built lies. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within hours of Isabella's revelation, news outlets exploded with headlines. "Isabella Tran alive, accuses husband of attempted murder." "Tran global scandal, CEO returns from the dead." "Marcus Nguyen exposed." The board of directors, unwilling to let the company sink under Marcus's corruption, voted unanimously to suspend him from all authority. Security escorted him and Vivian out of the glass tower that once symbolized Isabella's empire. Cameras followed their every step, capturing Marcus's red face twisted in fury and Vivian's tear-streaked cheeks as she tried to shield herself from the flashing lights. But their humiliation was only the beginning. 2 days later, the courthouse was packed. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward as Marcus and Vivian were brought in under heavy guard. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Isabella entered with quiet dignity, her hand resting protectively on her belly, Ethan at her side like a silent guardian. The crowd rose, murmurs of awe rippling through the chamber. The prosecution laid out the evidence. Financial records, testimonies from crew members, the damning recordings Daniel Cho had uncovered. Witness after witness painted the same picture. A greedy husband, a manipulative mistress, and a plan to erase the woman who had given Marcus everything. Marcus sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between jurors as though he could still intimidate them into believing his lies. Vivian, by contrast, crumbled quickly. Under the weight of questioning, her bravado dissolved into sobs. "It was his idea," she cried, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "He planned everything. I just went along because I loved him." Her betrayal ignited Marcus's fury. He slammed his fists against the table, shouting, "You loved the money, Vivian. You pushed me to do it." The judge's gavel thundered for order as guards restrained him. The spectacle made the decision easy. The jury found Marcus guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Vivian, though spared the harshest sentence for her cooperation, was convicted of conspiracy and perjury. Both were sentenced to prison, Marcus for decades, Vivian for years that would strip her of the glamorous life she had craved. The verdict sent shockwaves through the city. Justice, long buried under wealth and deception, had prevailed. When the judge announced the sentence, Isabella closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of release. The chains Marcus had bound her with were finally broken. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around her, shouting questions. Isabella stood tall, her voice steady. "I was betrayed. I was left for dead, but I survived, for my child, for myself, and for the truth. Let this be a message. No woman should ever be silenced by greed or fear." Flashes erupted as cameras captured her every word. The world no longer saw her as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience. And while Marcus and Vivian disappeared behind prison walls, Isabella stepped into the light. Her name, her empire, and her dignity restored. The storm that had once threatened to end Isabella's life was now a distant memory, replaced by mornings filled with sunlight and evenings graced by laughter. The world knew her story, the betrayal, the survival, the justice, and they celebrated her as more than a CEO. She had become a symbol of resilience, of the strength it takes to rise from ashes and claim life anew. But for Isabella, the true victory was not in the headlines. It was in the quiet moments she shared with Ethan. After the trial, she invited him into her world, not as a savior, but as a partner. He had stood beside her when she was broken, and now he stood beside her as she rebuilt. At first, the contrast between their lives seemed impossible. She, the head of a vast empire; he, a fisherman with nothing but his boat and his courage. But love has a way of bridging worlds. Ethan never wanted her fortune, only her happiness. And that was something Isabella had never truly known before. The day her child was born, Isabella held him close, tears streaming down her face. Ethan stood beside her, his rough hands trembling as he cradled the tiny newborn. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And he's ours." Isabella looked at him, her heart swelling. "He's yours as much as mine. You saved us both." From that moment, Ethan treated the boy as his own. He was there for every sleepless night, every first smile, every cry. He never let Isabella feel alone, never let the child feel unloved. And as the years passed, their bond grew unbreakable. To the child, Ethan was not a stepfather. He was simply father. Their happiness blossomed. Isabella and Ethan married in a quiet ceremony by the sea, with only close friends and loyal colleagues in attendance. There were no flashing cameras, no lavish displays, just vows spoken with sincerity and sealed with a kiss that carried the weight of survival and the promise of forever. At the reception, one of Isabella's closest board members raised a toast. To Isabella, who proved that storms cannot sink a true queen. And to Ethan, who reminds us all what it means to be a man. The room erupted in applause, but Isabella only smiled at Ethan, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. Months later, Isabella discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was not met with betrayal or fear, but with Ethan's arms around her, his voice whispering, "Another blessing. Another chance to love." Together they raised their children in a home filled with warmth rather than lies, laughter instead of greed. Ethan eventually joined Tran Global as co-CEO, not for power, but because Isabella trusted no one more. Under their joint leadership, the company flourished. Not through manipulation, but through integrity and vision. Employees felt the change, the world admired it, and those scars from the past would never fully fade. Isabella no longer carried them alone. She had built a life where her heart was safe, her children were cherished, and her legacy was secure. On a quiet evening by the shore, Ethan wrapped his arms around her as their son played in the sand, and Isabella's growing belly promised another child soon to come. The sunset bathed them in golden light, the waves gentle against the shore. "You know," Ethan murmured, resting his chin on her shoulder, "when I found you that night, I thought I was saving your life, but truth is, you saved mine." Isabella turned, her eyes shining. "We saved each other." And as the tide whispered against the sand, Isabella knew the storm had given her more than pain. It had given her the strength to rise, the courage to love, and the family she had always dreamed of. The woman Marcus tried to destroy had become stronger than ever. Not just a survivor, not just a queen, but a mother, a wife, and the keeper of a happiness that no storm could ever take away. So that's how the story comes to an end. My dear friends, you're still here with me, aren't you? If you've stayed until now, it means something in this journey touched your heart. And maybe, like Isabella, you faced storms you thought would drown you. The Stoics remind us, what stands in the way becomes the way. The very pain that almost destroyed us can be the strength that builds us. Isabella's fall into the sea was also her rise into a new life. Maybe your storm is different, but it can also be your turning point. Remember, resilience isn't about avoiding pain, but about transforming it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need hope today. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because together, we're not just telling stories, we're healing hearts. The night was supposed to be peaceful. Emily Parker, 27 years old and 5 months pregnant, sat in the dimly lit living room of her small house in Ohio. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the faint kick of the baby inside her. A quiet smile touched her lips. For weeks she had been lonely, but at least the baby reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. But tonight, everything would shatter. Her husband, Ryan Miller, stormed into the room. His eyes burned with anger, his hands trembling as he clutched a rolled-up canvas. He had just returned from his art gallery, and Emily could see the storm brewing in him. "What did you do to Sophia's painting?" he barked, his voice sharp as broken glass. Emily flinched at the name, Sophia Reed, the woman who had slithered into their lives like poison. A painter with talent, beauty, and the kind of confidence Emily never had. For months, Emily had suspected more than just business between Ryan and Sophia. Tonight, it seemed her fears were confirmed. "I didn't touch her painting," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. "Ryan, please, you need to calm down. I would never." "Don't lie to me," Ryan roared, slamming the canvas onto the floor. The painting showed deep scratches, as if someone had ruined it with a knife. "She told me you were jealous, that you couldn't stand her success. And now look, it's destroyed." Emily's heart pounded. She shook her head desperately. "I swear it wasn't me. Why would I do something like that? Ryan, I'm your wife and I'm carrying your child. Why can't you believe me?" But Ryan wasn't listening. His mind was poisoned by Sophia's whispers, by the charm she used like a weapon. In his eyes, Emily wasn't his wife anymore. She was the obstacle, the burden, the problem. Before Emily could back away, Ryan lunged at her, his hands wrapped around her neck, squeezing hard, cutting off her breath. Emily gasped, her hands clawing at his wrists. Fear shot through her veins as she thought of the tiny life inside her. Her baby. She couldn't die. Not like this. Not in the hands of the man she had trusted with her heart. Tears streamed down her face as she choked, her voice barely escaping. "Ryan, please, stop." But his grip only tightened. Emily's vision blurred. Darkness crept in from the edges. In those agonizing moments, memories of their love flashed before her. Their wedding day, the promises he made, the nights they dreamed of a family together. And now, all of it was being destroyed by betrayal. With the last ounce of strength, Emily shoved against his chest. He stumbled backward, loosening his grip just enough for her to collapse to the floor, gasping for air. Her throat burned, her body trembled, and her baby kicked frantically inside her. She looked up at Ryan, horrified. He stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes wide as if he didn't recognize himself. For a brief second, guilt flickered in his gaze. But then, from the doorway, a shadow appeared. Someone had witnessed the violence that was meant to stay hidden, and that someone would change everything. Before the darkness, there had been light. Before the betrayal, there had been love. Emily Parker remembered those days with painful clarity, as if they belonged to someone else's life. At 27, Emily was known in her small Ohio town as a gentle soul. She taught at the local elementary school, where her patience and warmth made her beloved by children and parents alike. Her students often drew pictures of her with big smiles, surrounding her with hearts and stars. "Mrs. Parker is the best teacher," they would scribble in crayon. Those small tokens of affection were treasures to Emily. Her dream had always been simple: a family, a home filled with laughter, and a child she could love unconditionally. When she married Ryan Miller, she thought that dream had come true. He was charming back then, full of ambition, but also tender with her. He promised to build a life where she would never feel alone. She remembered his words on their wedding day, whispered into her ear as they danced. "No matter what happens, it's you and me against the world." Those words now felt like knives in her chest. When Emily discovered she was pregnant, her happiness overflowed. She decorated a small corner of their home into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and placing stuffed animals on the shelves. She imagined late nights rocking her baby to sleep, Ryan by her side, both of them marveling at the tiny miracle they created. But slowly, Ryan began to change. His focus shifted from their marriage to his growing art gallery. At first, Emily was proud. She supported his passion, stayed up late helping him with paperwork, even made sandwiches when he worked through the night. She wanted to be the wife who cheered him on, the partner who shared his burdens. Then Sophia Reed entered the picture. Emily remembered the first time she met Sophia, standing inside Ryan's gallery with her fiery red hair and confident smile. Sophia's eyes lingered on Ryan too long, her laugh ringing a little too sweetly in the air. Emily tried to brush off her instincts. "She's just another artist," Ryan had said dismissively. But Emily's heart whispered otherwise. Soon, Ryan spent more nights at the gallery than at home. When he did return, he carried the scent of Sophia's perfume on his clothes. Emily tried to confront him gently, but Ryan grew defensive, accusing her of being insecure, jealous, ungrateful. She learned to cry silently in the bathroom so he wouldn't see her pain. Still, she held on to hope. She told herself once the baby arrived, Ryan would remember what mattered. She believed love could heal. that loyalty could survive temptation. But as her belly grew, so did Ryan's distance. The man who once held her close now pushed her away. One rainy evening, as she folded tiny baby clothes, Emily whispered to her unborn child, "Don't worry, little one. Mommy will protect you. No matter what, I'll always be here for you." Tears slid down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. She wanted her baby to feel loved, even inside the storm. And yet, deep down, a shadow of fear crept into her heart. Because the man she once trusted with her life was slipping away, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold the pieces together. That fear would soon prove justified. The storm that would shatter Emily's life didn't begin with violence. It began with a smile. Sophia Reed walked into Ryan's gallery one evening, carrying a canvas larger than her own frame. She was 29, a painter with striking red hair, sharp green eyes, and the kind of beauty that drew attention the moment she entered a room. Her confidence filled the space like perfume, intoxicating to some, suffocating to others. Emily had been there that day, visiting Ryan after work, her swollen belly making movements slower, but her heart still eager to support her husband. She remembered how Ryan's eyes lit up when he saw Sophia. Not the way a gallery owner admires an artist's work. It was deeper, sharper, almost hungry. "This is Sophia," Ryan introduced, his tone unusually warm. "She's brilliant, Emily. Her art will bring this gallery the recognition it deserves." Sophia extended her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So you're the wife?" she said, her voice smooth, laced with something Emily couldn't name. "Ryan's told me you're sweet. Sweet." The word felt like a dagger wrapped in silk. Emily shook her hand politely, masking the unease rising in her chest. She had always believed in kindness first, in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But something about Sophia's lingering gaze on Ryan made her instincts scream. From that day on, Sophia became a fixture in their lives. Ryan spoke of her constantly, her techniques, her vision, her potential. He stayed late at the gallery, often texting with Sophia long after Emily had gone to bed. When Emily asked if they could spend more time together before the baby arrived, Ryan brushed her off. "I'm building a future for us," he snapped. "Why can't you understand?" But Emily did understand. She understood too well. She saw how Sophia leaned closer when Ryan spoke, how her laughter curled around him like a spell. She saw the admiration in Ryan's eyes, the kind he once reserved only for Emily. At home, the changes grew sharper. Ryan grew impatient, easily irritated by Emily's questions or her fatigue. He stopped touching her belly, stopped asking about the baby. Sometimes he didn't even come home at all, claiming he had to help Sophia with late-night projects. Emily would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, trying not to drown in loneliness. One night, Emily decided to surprise Ryan with dinner at the gallery. She carried a basket of his favorite food, hoping to remind him of the life they once shared. But when she arrived, she froze at the sight before her. Through the glass window, she saw Ryan and Sophia standing close, his hand on her shoulder, their laughter too intimate to be professional. For a long moment, Emily couldn't breathe. The food basket slipped from her grasp, tumbling to the sidewalk. Her worst fear had taken shape. Emily turned away, her chest aching, her mind spinning. She wanted to scream, to confront him then and there. But her voice stayed trapped inside, strangled by the weight of betrayal. She had no idea that this was only the beginning of Sophia's game. The Ryan Miller that Emily once knew was slowly vanishing, replaced by someone colder, harsher, and nearly unrecognizable. There was a time when Ryan came home with flowers, when he would pull Emily close after a long day and whisper about their future together. He used to trace his fingers gently over her belly, grinning with excitement every time the baby kicked. "I can't wait to meet our little one," he used to say. Those words had once been her anchor. But lately, Ryan's voice carried a sharpness that cut through Emily's heart. His eyes, once soft with love, now looked past her as though she were invisible. At first, Emily tried to excuse it. She told herself that stress was changing him, that the gallery demanded more from him than before. She tried to be patient, cooking his favorite meals, leaving encouraging notes on his desk, even ironing his shirts late at night while her back ached from the pregnancy. She wanted to remind him of the woman who had stood by his side when he had nothing. But Ryan didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. His obsession with Sophia's work grew unbearable. He spoke of her endlessly, praising her talent, her passion, her once-in-a-generation genius. The way he said Sophia's name made Emily's stomach twist. It was the same tone he once used when speaking of Emily herself. The changes weren't just in his words, but in his actions. He stopped coming home for dinner. He left Emily waiting alone at the table, the food growing cold while the clock ticked into the night. When he did come home, his shirt smelled faintly of Sophia's perfume, a scent Emily now despised. The fights began small. Emily would ask, "Why didn't you call? I was worried." Ryan would snap back, "I don't need to check in every hour. Stop acting like a child." Her silence became her shield. She learned that speaking up only pushed him further away. Still, the hurt carved deeper inside her. One evening, Emily gathered her courage to ask if Sophia was more than just an artist in his gallery. Her voice trembled, but she needed the truth. Ryan's response was brutal. He laughed, a cold, dismissive laugh that sliced through her soul. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "Sophia inspires me, something you've never been able to do." The words hit harder than any physical blow. That night, Emily cried quietly in their bedroom, her hand resting on her stomach, whispering apologies to her unborn child. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I wanted to give you a father who loved us. I don't know what's happening anymore." Meanwhile, Ryan was slipping further into Sophia's world. The man who once dreamed of family dinners and bedtime stories was now consumed with the chase of success, blinded by Sophia's charm and the illusion of grandeur she promised. For Emily, the distance was no longer just emotional. It was a canyon she couldn't cross. And soon Ryan's coldness would turn into something far more dangerous. The night the truth revealed itself was colder than usual, the kind of Ohio evening where the air cut against the skin. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her as she carried a small basket of food. She had spent the afternoon preparing Ryan's favorite meal, roast chicken with mashed potatoes, the kind of comfort food that used to make him smile. She told herself he would appreciate the gesture, that maybe this small act of love could bridge the distance between them. Her belly was heavy now, 5 months along, and every step was slower. Still, she pushed forward, determined to surprise him at the gallery. Perhaps they could sit together, eat, and talk like they once did. Maybe, just maybe, he would remember that they were still a family. As Emily approached the glass doors of the gallery, she stopped. Through the window, she could see Ryan. He wasn't alone. Sophia Reed stood beside him, her fiery red hair catching the glow of the gallery lights. She leaned close, laughing softly, her hand brushing against Ryan's arm as if it belonged there. Ryan didn't pull away. In fact, he leaned closer, his expression warm, his smile the kind Emily hadn't seen in months. The basket slipped from Emily's trembling hands, landing on the sidewalk with a dull thud. The carefully prepared dinner spilled out, chicken and potatoes scattering across the ground. She barely noticed. Her eyes stayed locked on the scene inside, her heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. She had feared this. She had prayed she was wrong. But now, the truth stood before her, undeniable. Emily pressed a hand against her belly, instinctively shielding her unborn child. She wanted to turn away, to run, but her feet felt cemented to the ground. She couldn't tear her eyes from the betrayal unfolding behind the glass. Inside, Ryan reached up to tuck a strand of Sophia's hair behind her ear. Sophia tilted her face toward him, her smile triumphant, as if she knew Emily was out there watching. For a fleeting moment, Emily thought their eyes met through the window, that Sophia's smirk widened deliberately, savoring the pain she was inflicting. Emily gasped softly, the sound lost in the night air. Her vision blurred with tears. Every memory of her marriage, the vows, the promises, the late-night talks, crumbled into dust in that instant. She staggered backward, clutching her coat tightly around her. Her breaths came in sharp gasps, and she fought to steady herself. The baby inside her shifted, as if sensing her turmoil. Emily whispered shakily, "It's okay, little one. Mommy's here." But she didn't believe her own words. The door to the gallery suddenly opened, and Ryan stepped outside. He looked startled to see her, standing there with tears streaming down her face, the ruined dinner at her feet. For a split second, guilt flickered in his eyes. But then Sophia appeared behind him, resting her hand possessively on his arm. Her gaze on Emily was cold, victorious. Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came. In that moment, Emily knew her world had shattered beyond repair. The silence outside the gallery was deafening. Emily stood trembling, her eyes swollen with tears, while Ryan shifted uncomfortably under the weight of her gaze. For a brief moment, it looked as though he might break, might admit what she had seen with her own eyes. But instead, his expression hardened. "Emily," he snapped, his tone clipped and impatient. "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be wandering around in your condition." Her condition. He said it like her pregnancy was an inconvenience rather than a miracle they had once prayed for. Emily's voice cracked. "I came to surprise you. I wanted us to have dinner together, Ryan. I wanted." She glanced toward Sophia, who was still standing in the doorway, smirking. "And this is what I find?" Ryan's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look guilty. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice lowering into something cold and cutting. "You've been paranoid for months, Emily. Always accusing me, always suspicious. Do you realize how exhausting that is? Do you know how suffocating it feels to come home to a wife who doesn't trust me?" Emily's lips parted in shock. "Paranoid?" she whispered. "I saw you, Ryan. I saw how you looked at her. Enough." His voice thundered in the quiet street, making her flinch. "Sophia believes in me. She sees my potential, my talent. What have you done lately? You sit at home, whining, clinging to me, acting like your pregnancy is the only thing that matters. Do you think that inspires me? Do you think that makes me want to come home?" His words pierced her deeper than any physical wound. Emily staggered back as if struck, one hand clutching her chest, the other cradling her belly protectively. "I carried your child because we wanted this," she whispered through her tears. "Because you promised me a family. I've supported you, Ryan. Every late night, every bill, every sacrifice, I've been there. And now you say I'm a burden?" Ryan's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but before Emily could see remorse, Sophia's laugh cut through the air like broken glass. "Maybe she's just jealous, Ryan," Sophia said sweetly, sliding her hand further up his arm. "Some women can't handle their husbands having ambition. It's easier to cry than to grow." Emily turned toward Sophia, her voice shaking with fury. "You're tearing apart a marriage. You knew he had a wife. You knew I was pregnant, and you didn't care." Sophia tilted her head mockingly. "Maybe if you were enough for him, he wouldn't have come to me." Ryan didn't correct her. He didn't defend Emily. He just stood there, silent, his betrayal as loud as thunder. The cold night wind whipped against Emily's face as she realized the man she had once trusted with her heart no longer saw her as his partner, his wife, or even the mother of his child. He saw her as an obstacle, and soon Ryan's cruelty would reach a breaking point Emily never imagined. The house was silent that evening, yet the silence felt heavy, dangerous. Emily sat curled on the couch, her hands resting protectively over her belly. Her eyes were red from hours of crying, but there were no tears left to shed. She had endured Ryan's coldness, his cruel words, and Sophia's taunts. Still, she clung to the hope that he might come to his senses. The sound of the front door slamming shattered that fragile hope. Ryan stormed inside, his footsteps heavy, his face twisted in rage. He carried a rolled-up canvas, the same one Sophia had been working on for weeks. The edges of the painting were ripped, colors smeared as if someone had dragged a knife across it. Ryan's voice exploded in the room. "What did you do?" he shouted, waving the ruined painting in front of her. "Sophia told me you were jealous, that you couldn't stand her talent. And now, look at this. You destroyed her masterpiece." Emily's heart raced. She shook her head, horrified. "No, Ryan, I didn't touch it. I swear to you, I would never do that. Please, you have to believe me." But Ryan's mind was poisoned. He saw betrayal where there was none, because Sophia's words had already filled his ears with venom. "You're pathetic," he snarled. "Always crying, always clinging, and now you stoop to this? You think you can ruin her work and I won't find out?" Emily's voice trembled. "I am your wife. I'm carrying your child. Why can't you see who's really lying to you?" "Ryan, she's using you." That was the last thread of patience he had. With a roar, Ryan lunged forward. His hands gripped her throat, squeezing hard, cutting off her breath. Emily's eyes widened in terror. She clawed at his wrists, gasping desperately for air. Pain shot through her chest as the pressure tightened. Her baby kicked violently inside her, as if begging her to fight, to survive. Her vision blurred. Spots of light danced before her eyes. She could hear Ryan's ragged breathing, could feel his strength crushing her windpipe. She thought of the promises he once made, the vows he had broken. She thought of the tiny life inside her, so fragile, so innocent. With the last ounce of strength, Emily shoved against his chest. For a moment, his grip loosened. She collapsed to the floor, coughing violently, clutching her throat. Every breath burned like fire, but she was alive. Ryan staggered back, staring at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. His chest heaved, his eyes wild, torn between fury and the faint flicker of guilt. But before he could speak, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps from the hallway. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Someone had witnessed everything, and their presence would change the course of Emily's life forever. The night air outside the house was bitter, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled into Emily's bones. Her throat ached from Ryan's grip, her body trembling from the violence she had narrowly escaped. She pressed her hand against her belly, whispering softly to the child within her, "I won't let him hurt you. I promise." Inside, Ryan still paced, muttering angrily to himself. His footsteps echoed through the halls, heavy and erratic, like a man losing control of his own mind. Emily knew she couldn't stay another minute. If she stayed, she might not survive the next outburst. Quietly, she slipped into the bedroom. Her eyes darted across the familiar space, now a cage rather than a sanctuary. She reached for a small duffel bag in the closet and began stuffing it with essentials. Her wallet, a few changes of clothes, the folder containing her medical records. Every movement felt like a race against time. Her throat tightened as she paused by the nursery corner. The soft yellow walls, the tiny clothes folded neatly on the dresser, the stuffed bear Ryan had once bought when he still cared. It all stared back at her like a cruel reminder of the life she had dreamed of. She wanted to take everything, to protect the world she had built for her baby, but she had no strength, no time. A floorboard creaked. Ryan's shadow darkened the hallway. Emily froze, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he would hear it. She clutched the duffel bag, forcing her breaths to stay silent. The shadow moved away. A door slammed. Ryan had retreated to his studio, perhaps to brood over Sophia's painting again. Emily knew this was her only chance. Her hands shook as she slipped on her coat, zipped the bag, and crept toward the front door. Every step was agony, her body screaming for rest, but her spirit pushing forward. Survival meant everything now, not just for her, but for the life growing inside her. The cold wind hit her face as she stepped outside. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The home she once cherished was now nothing but a prison filled with broken promises. She walked quickly down the street, her tears freezing against her cheeks. She didn't know where she was going. She had no plan, no destination, only the need to be far away from Ryan, from Sophia, from the nightmare her marriage had become. A neighbor's light flicked on. Emily saw a curtain shift, a pair of concerned eyes peeking out. Perhaps they had heard the shouting, the chaos. She pulled her hood tighter, hoping they wouldn't call out to her. She wasn't ready to speak, not yet. Her legs ached, her throat burned, but she kept walking. Each step felt like defiance, like reclaiming a piece of the strength Ryan had tried to crush out of her. By the time she reached the edge of town, exhaustion nearly brought her to her knees. She sank onto a bench at the bus stop, clutching her belly, whispering again, "We're safe now. I'll protect you." But as headlights appeared in the distance, Emily realized she had only escaped one danger. A much harsher battle was waiting ahead. The bus jolted as it rattled down the empty Ohio highway. Emily sat near the back, her duffel bag clutched tightly against her chest, her other hand resting protectively over her belly. She felt every bump in the road, every ache in her body, but her mind was far heavier than her limbs. She had left everything behind, her home, her marriage, the life she once believed in. Now she was adrift, carrying only the clothes on her back and the fragile life inside her. The bus driver's voice called out the next stop, and Emily stepped off into the freezing night air. She found herself in a small neighboring town, unfamiliar streets stretching out in front of her. Neon lights from a rundown diner flickered nearby. With nowhere else to go, she pushed open the door. The warmth of the diner was immediate, but it didn't soothe her. She slid into a corner booth, lowering her hood, and stared at the menu without really seeing it. A A kind waitress approached, her smile gentle. "What can I get you, honey?" Emily hesitated, her voice breaking. "Just a glass of water, please." The woman frowned. "You sure you don't want something to eat?" Emily nodded quickly, her cheeks burning with shame. She didn't have enough money to waste. Every dollar counted now. She had to save it for the baby, for whatever came next. When the water arrived, Emily wrapped her hands around the glass, trying to steady herself. Her reflection in the window caught her eye. Pale face, swollen eyes, a thin red mark still visible around her neck. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The reality hit her all at once. She was alone. Truly alone. Ryan wasn't coming for her. He wasn't going to change. And Sophia had stolen not only her husband but the life she thought was hers. Her chest tightened, and before she could stop it, tears spilled down her cheeks. She tried to hold them back, covering her face with her hands, but the sobs broke through. The other diners pretended not to notice, though she could feel their eyes flicking toward her, curious, pitying. Suddenly, a sharp cramp ripped through her stomach. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Fear surged like lightning through her veins. Not now, not the baby. Please God, not the baby. She doubled over in pain, breathing hard, praying it would pass. After a few terrifying moments, the cramp eased, leaving her trembling in the booth. She whispered to her child, "Stay with me, please. I can't lose you, too." The waitress returned, alarm flashing in her eyes. "Sweetheart, are you all right? You don't look so good." Emily forced a weak smile, wiping at her tears. "I'll be fine, just tired." But she wasn't fine. She was at her breaking point. Her body was fragile, her spirit nearly crushed, her future uncertain. She had run from Ryan's violence, but now she faced another enemy, survival itself. And she didn't yet know that a familiar face would soon appear, offering the lifeline she desperately needed. Emily sat in the booth, her hands trembling around the glass of water. The pain in her stomach had eased, but fear still gripped her chest like a vice. She stared at the doorway of the diner, wondering if she had made a mistake leaving, if she could really survive on her own. The bell above the door jingled. A tall man stepped inside, brushing the cold night air off his coat. His dark hair was damp from the snow, his expression tired from a long day. Emily didn't notice him at first, but when he glanced around the diner, his eyes landed on her. He froze. "Emily?" His voice carried disbelief and concern. She looked up, startled. For a moment her mind raced, struggling to place the familiar face. Then it clicked. Daniel Hayes, her old friend from college. They had studied together, laughed together, even shared late-night talks about dreams and futures. She hadn't seen him in years. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. He crossed the diner in quick strides, sliding into the booth across from her. His eyes scanned her face, then the faint bruises around her neck. His jaw clenched. "What happened to you?" Emily shook her head, shame flooding her. She didn't want to tell him, didn't want him to see how far she had fallen. But Daniel's steady gaze held hers, patient and unyielding. The words spilled out before she could stop them. The betrayal, the cruelty, the violence. Ryan's hands around her throat, Sophia's mocking smile. The escape into the freezing night. Every sentence tore open wounds she had tried to bury. By the time she finished, tears streamed down her cheeks. She whispered, "I don't know what to do anymore. I don't even know if I can keep going." Daniel reached across the table, covering her trembling hand with his. "You don't have to do this alone, Emily. Not anymore." His words were steady, firm, like an anchor pulling her back from the storm. For the first time in weeks, she felt the faint flicker of hope. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. "You're not a burden," Daniel replied. "You're someone who deserves better. And I'm not going to let you or your baby suffer because of Ryan's mistakes." The waitress returned with concern etched on her face. Daniel ordered food for both of them, ignoring Emily's weak protest. "You need to eat," he told her gently. "You need your strength." As the hot meal arrived, Emily realized just how long it had been since she had felt safe. Sitting across from Daniel, hearing his calm voice, seeing his determination. It reminded her of a world she thought she had lost. Her child kicked softly, almost as if sensing the shift. Emily placed her hand over her belly, whispering in her heart, "Maybe we're not alone after all." For the first time since leaving Ryan, Emily felt the possibility of survival. But she didn't yet know that Ryan's regret and Sophia's schemes were already brewing, threatening to pull her back into the storm. The following morning, Emily woke up in a warm bed for the first time since leaving Ryan. She blinked against the soft light streaming through the curtains, disoriented at first, until the events of the previous night returned. Daniel had insisted she stay at his place rather than spend another night alone, and she had been too weak to argue. The guest room was small but cozy. A folded blanket rested at the edge of the bed, and a glass of water sat on the nightstand. Simple gestures, but they brought tears to her eyes. It had been so long since someone cared for her without asking for anything in return. Down the hall, she could hear the faint sound of Daniel moving around, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of the coffee maker. For a moment, she simply lay still, listening. Safe. That feeling alone was enough to steady her heartbeat. When she entered the kitchen, Daniel looked up from the stove, his face breaking into a small smile. "Morning. Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." Emily lowered herself into a chair, her hands resting protectively on her belly. "You didn't have to do all this," she murmured. "Yes, I did," Daniel said firmly. "You need food, rest, and care. That's non-negotiable." The smell of eggs and toast filled the room, a scent that felt almost foreign after so many weeks of stress and hunger. Emily ate slowly, each bite reminding her how fragile she had become. Daniel didn't press her with questions. He simply sat across from her, his calm presence steadying her trembling spirit. After breakfast, he placed a folder on the table. Inside were forms and legal documents. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "Ryan crossed a line. He attacked you, Emily. That's not just betrayal. It's a crime. You have the right to protect yourself and your baby." Her hands tightened around her glass of water. The thought of facing Ryan again sent a chill down her spine, but she also knew Daniel was right. She couldn't keep running forever. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "You are. I've known you since college. You've always been stronger than you think. And now, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for your child. That kind of strength can move mountains." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't only from pain. For the first time, someone believed in her, truly believed. She nodded slowly. "I'll do it. I'll protect us, no matter what." Daniel's smile was small but proud. That's the Emily I remember. That night, as Emily lay in the guest bed once more, she whispered to her unborn child, "We're going to be okay. Mommy's going to fight for you." The words felt like a vow, strong and unbreakable. She didn't know what battles lay ahead, but she knew one thing. She wasn't powerless anymore. And soon, Ryan's carefully built world would begin to crack. Ryan Miller sat alone in his gallery late at night, the walls around him lined with paintings that suddenly felt lifeless. The lights cast long shadows across the floor, and the silence was deafening. He rubbed his temples, trying to drown out the thoughts swirling in his head. Emily was gone. She had left him, walking out into the night with nothing but a duffel bag. At first, Ryan told himself it didn't matter. He told himself Emily was weak, that she couldn't understand his ambition, that Sophia was the one who truly saw his worth. But now, sitting in the emptiness of the gallery, doubt began to creep in. Across the room, Sophia Reed stood at an easel, painting with swift, confident strokes. Her beauty was undeniable. But tonight, Ryan noticed something else, a coldness in her eyes, a distance in her smile. "Why are you so quiet?" Sophia asked without looking at him. Ryan hesitated. "I was just thinking about Emily." Sophia's brush froze mid-stroke. She turned her head, her expression sharp. "Why waste your thoughts on her? She never understood you. She never belonged in this world." Ryan flinched at the harshness of her tone. It was true that Emily didn't belong to the art world, but she had belonged to him, or at least she had tried. She had supported him when no one else did, stayed up late with him when the gallery was just a dream. He remembered her laughter, her gentle patience, the way she placed his head on her lap when he was too tired to move. For the first time in weeks, he felt a pang of guilt. "She was carrying my child," Ryan muttered. Sophia rolled her eyes. "Children are distractions. You'll never become the artist you're meant to be if you're tied down with diapers and lullabies. You need to focus, Ryan. On me. On us." Her words landed like ice in his veins. Wasn't it Emily who had always told him he was capable of more? Wasn't it Emily who dreamed of a future where his name would be known, but also where their child would be safe in his arms? Ryan's chest tightened. For the first time, Sophia's charm didn't feel intoxicating. It felt suffocating. Later that night, after Sophia left, Ryan wandered into the storage room. His eyes fell on an old sketchbook, Emily's gift to him from years ago. Inside were his earliest drawings, scribbled notes of encouragement written in her neat handwriting. "Keep going, Ryan. I believe in you." His throat tightened as he ran his fingers over the faded ink. A wave of regret washed over him, sharp and relentless. He had traded a woman who truly loved him for one who only loved what he could give her. Ryan sank onto a stool, burying his face in his hands. For the first time since Emily left, he felt the weight of what he had done. But regret would not save him from the consequences that were already coming. Ryan Miller thought Sophia Reed was his salvation. In truth, she was the storm that would strip him of everything he owned. At first, Sophia played her role perfectly. She showered him with admiration, told him his vision was brilliant, convinced him that the gallery could become the most prestigious in Ohio. Ryan, desperate to prove himself, believed every word. He poured money into her projects, buying expensive canvases, rare pigments, hiring photographers to showcase her art. "Trust me," Sophia would say, her green eyes glittering. "This is just the beginning. Soon, everyone will know your name." Ryan ignored the growing stack of unpaid bills. He ignored the worried calls from vendors demanding payment. He ignored the whispers that Sophia was more interested in his wallet than in his gallery. He told himself this was investment, that success required sacrifice. But the sacrifices grew heavier by the week. One morning, Ryan arrived at the gallery to find Sophia sitting with two men in suits. She smiled sweetly and introduced them as investors. "They're willing to buy a stake in your gallery," she explained. "With their backing, we can expand." Ryan signed the papers without reading the fine print. He trusted Sophia too much. Weeks later, he discovered the truth. The so-called investors weren't backing the gallery, they were siphoning it. His ownership was reduced to almost nothing. Sophia had arranged it all, positioning herself as the star while leaving Ryan buried under debts. When he confronted her, Sophia didn't flinch. "You should be thanking me," she said coolly, swirling a glass of wine in her hand. "You never had the courage to make bold moves. I did. And now I'm the name everyone remembers." "Not you." Ryan's chest tightened with anger. "You used me. You made me believe." "Believe what?" she interrupted, her smile sharp. "That we were in love? Don't be naive, Ryan. Love doesn't pay the bills. Talent does. And between you and me, only one of us has it." Her words cut deeper than Emily's silence ever had. The gallery that once represented his dreams now felt like a hollow shell. The staff whispered about Sophia behind his back, mocking how easily she had taken control. Collectors who once called Ryan now called Sophia directly. His name was fading, replaced by hers. At night, Ryan sat alone in his empty apartment, staring at the bills piling up on the table. The guilt of losing Emily gnawed at him, but the betrayal of Sophia burned like fire. He realized too late that he had sacrificed everything. His wife, his child, his dignity, for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone. And yet, despite the wreckage, Ryan couldn't escape her hold completely. She still had a way of pulling him back, of making him believe that maybe, just maybe, she cared. But Sophia's hunger was far from satisfied, and Ryan was about to learn that when she was finished using him, she would discard him without hesitation. The days after Emily's escape were filled with quiet healing. Daniel Hayes made sure of it. He drove her to her doctor's appointments, kept track of her medications, and gently reminded her to rest, even when she tried to push herself too hard. Under his watch, Emily began to feel pieces of her strength returning. But healing wasn't just physical, it was emotional. At night, she still woke from nightmares, Ryan's hands around her throat, Sophia's mocking smile lingering in her mind. Each time, Daniel was there, sitting by her side, reminding her she wasn't alone. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, Daniel placed a stack of documents on the table. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about your future, about protecting yourself and your baby, about holding Ryan accountable." Emily's hands trembled as she touched the folder. Inside were legal papers, witness statements, and photographs of her bruised neck, taken shortly after the attack. The evidence was there. clear, undeniable. Her first instinct was fear. "If I go through with this, he'll come after me," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "No, that's why I'm here. You don't have to fight him alone. You have the law on your side, and you have me. But Emily, the choice is yours." She closed her eyes, her heart pounding. All her life she had chosen silence, enduring Ryan's coldness, swallowing her pain, hoping things would change. But nothing had changed. If she didn't act now, nothing ever would. Slowly she opened her eyes, resolve sparking inside them. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'll protect my child. I'll protect myself." Daniel's expression softened into a proud smile. "That's the Emily I remember." Over the next weeks, Emily prepared. She met with lawyers, signed affidavits, and recounted every detail of Ryan's abuse. It wasn't easy. Each word felt like reopening a wound, but with each step, she grew stronger. The timid woman who once whispered apologies in the shadows was gone. In her place was a mother determined to survive. Daniel noticed the change too. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he watched Emily reviewing documents with a focused expression. "You've changed," he said quietly. Emily looked up, surprised. "Changed?" "Yes," Daniel replied. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're fighting back." Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. "For my baby," she said simply. Daniel nodded. "And for yourself." Emily glanced down at her belly, feeling a small kick beneath her palm. For the first time in months, she felt more than fear. She felt hope. The woman who once trembled under Ryan's shadow was learning to stand tall again. And soon she would face him not as a broken wife, but as a mother and a fighter ready to expose the truth. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, its echoing halls buzzing with tension. Emily Parker sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her heart pounded so hard she feared everyone in the room could hear it. Daniel Hayes sat beside her, his calm presence steadying her nerves. Across the aisle, Ryan Miller entered with Sophia Reed, trailing behind him. Ryan wore a suit, but it couldn't hide the exhaustion etched into his face. Sophia, however, looked smug, her green eyes glinting as though this were just another performance. Emily forced herself not to look away. She had come too far to shrink back now. The judge entered, calling the court to order. The trial began. Daniel rose first, his voice steady as he presented the case. He laid out the timeline of abuse, the neglect, the betrayal. He introduced the photographs of Emily's bruises, the medical reports confirming the strain of stress on her pregnancy. Every piece of evidence cut through the courtroom silence like a blade. Then came the witness, Mrs. Turner, the neighbor. She stepped up nervously, clutching her purse. "I heard shouting that night," she testified. "I looked out and saw Ryan with his hands around Emily's throat. She was fighting to breathe." Her voice shook, but her conviction didn't waver. Emily's chest tightened as she relived the memory, but she felt gratitude for Mrs. Turner's courage. When it was Ryan's turn, he leaned forward, his tone defensive, almost desperate. "Your Honor, this is all being twisted. Emily has always been emotional, unstable. I never meant to hurt her. She's exaggerating to make me look like a monster." Daniel's rebuttal was swift. "Is this exaggeration?" he asked, holding up the photograph of Emily's bruised neck. The jury leaned in, their expressions hardening. Ryan faltered, his eyes darting toward Sophia for reassurance. She gave him a cold nod, but for the first time, he looked uncertain. Then Emily took the stand. Her legs shook as she walked forward, but she refused to let fear stop her. She raised her hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. Her voice was soft at first. "I loved Ryan. I believed in him. I gave him everything I had. But when Sophia came into our lives, everything changed. He became someone I didn't recognize. And one night, he tried to kill me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emily's voice broke, but she pressed on. "I'm carrying his child, and even then, he didn't stop. I ran because if I didn't, my baby and I wouldn't be alive today." Tears welled in her eyes, but she lifted her chin. For the first time, she spoke without trembling. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for protection, for justice, for my child." The jury leaned forward, their expressions softened with empathy. Across the room, Ryan buried his face in his hands. Sophia rolled her eyes, but even she couldn't hide the flicker of discomfort. The truth had been spoken, and the tide was turning. The verdict didn't come that day. Court cases stretched on, hearings stacked one after another. But the damage to Ryan Miller's life had already begun. The story spread quickly through town. Neighbors whispered about the gallery owner who had raised his hands against his pregnant wife. Parents pulled their children from his art classes. Collectors who once praised his ambition now refused to return his calls. The gallery that had once been his pride stood nearly empty, its walls echoing with silence. Ryan tried to salvage what remained. He sent out invitations for a new exhibition featuring Sophia Reed's paintings, hoping her talent could restore his reputation. But on the night of the event, fewer than a dozen people showed up. Half were curious onlookers drawn by scandal rather than art. The once bustling gallery now felt like a graveyard of broken dreams. In the middle of the exhibition, Sophia disappeared into a back room with a wealthy collector. When Ryan confronted her later demanding an explanation, she laughed in his face. "Do you really think people still respect you?" she sneered. "You're finished, Ryan. The only reason anyone even came tonight was to see me. Without me, you're nothing." Her words stung, but deep down, Ryan knew they were true. His name was tarnished. His marriage was shattered. The gallery was slipping through his fingers. And Sophia, the woman he had sacrificed everything for, was already searching for her next opportunity. At night, Ryan sat alone in his apartment, staring at the empty bottles scattered across the table. He replayed Emily's testimony in his head. Her trembling voice, her tears, the strength it had taken for her to speak the truth. For the first time, he couldn't silence the guilt gnawing at him. He had once loved her. He had once promised to protect her. And now she was gone, carrying the child he might never meet. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "We need to talk." When he met her the next day, she didn't bother with pretenses. She handed him a stack of papers, legal documents transferring gallery ownership entirely into her name. "You signed away most of it already," she said coolly. "This just makes it official. Consider it my way of cutting ties." Ryan's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. "You can't do this. After everything I gave you? Everything you gave me?" Sophia laughed, her green eyes glittering with cruelty. "You gave me nothing I couldn't take myself. You were just too blind to see it." She turned to leave, her heels clicking against the floor like a victory march. Ryan sank into a chair, the weight of his downfall crashing over him. He had lost Emily. He had lost his child. And now he had lost the gallery, his last shred of identity. For the first time in his life, Ryan Miller was utterly alone, and his spiral into regret was only beginning. Winter melted into spring, and with it came the moment Emily Parker had been both dreading and longing for. The contractions started one quiet evening while she sat in Daniel Hayes's living room, reading through baby name books. At first, she dismissed the sharp pains as false alarms, but soon they grew stronger, sharper, until her breath came in shallow gasps. "Daniel," she whispered, clutching her belly, "I think it's time." His calm demeanor didn't falter. In seconds, he had her coat around her shoulders, her hospital bag in his hand, and his car keys ready. "We'll get you there safely," he assured her, guiding her gently but firmly to the car. The ride to the hospital felt endless. Emily gripped the seat, sweat beading on her forehead as waves of pain rippled through her. Daniel drove faster than she had ever seen him drive, glancing at her every few seconds. "Breathe, Emily. You're strong. You've got this." At the hospital, nurses rushed her into a delivery room. The white walls, the hum of machines, the blur of voices, it all felt surreal. Emily lay back, fear and anticipation mingling inside her. She remembered Ryan's hands on her throat, the betrayal, the pain. For a fleeting second, doubt pierced her heart. Could she really do this? Could she bring a child into a world that had been so cruel? Then she felt a tiny kick inside her. The baby was reminding her, this wasn't just about fear. This was about love, about survival, about a future. Hours of labor stretched on. Emily screamed, cried, and gripped Daniel's hand until her knuckles turned white. He never left her side. He whispered encouragement, wiped her forehead with a damp cloth, and anchored her through the storm. And then at last, the piercing cry of new life filled the room. Emily's tears flowed freely as the nurse placed a tiny bundle into her arms. The baby's skin was soft, her fists clenched, her cries strong. Emily's heart swelled as she whispered, "Hello, my love. You're safe now." Daniel stood beside her, his eyes damp, his smile gentle. "She's perfect," he said softly. Emily looked at him, gratitude overwhelming her. In the darkest moment of her life, when she thought she had lost everything, Daniel had been the one to bring her hope again. That night, as Emily held her daughter close, she felt a peace she hadn't known in months. The bruises on her body were fading, the scars on her soul still raw, but in her arms was proof that she had survived. She kissed the baby's forehead, whispering a vow only the child could hear. "I will protect you. I will give you a life filled with love, even if I have to fight the whole world to do it." Her journey wasn't over. Ryan still lurked in the shadows of her past, and Sophia's cruelty hadn't yet been punished. But Emily was no longer the fragile woman who once begged for love. She was a mother now, and nothing could break her again. Weeks passed after Emily's daughter was born, and with each sunrise, Emily felt a new version of herself emerging. The fragile woman who once cried in silence was gone. In her place stood a mother, steady and determined, with a strength she had never known she possessed. The first step was independence. With Daniel's guidance, Emily found a small but cozy apartment near the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, faded wallpaper, and squeaky floors. But to her, it was freedom. She decorated the nursery with soft blankets and gentle colors, filling it with laughter as she rocked her baby to sleep. Every sound of her daughter's tiny breaths reminded Emily that she had made the right choice, leaving Ryan. Her confidence grew in small moments. She learned to manage her finances, something Ryan had always controlled. She cooked simple meals, washed bottles late into the night, and balanced the exhaustion of motherhood with quiet determination. Some days were harder than others, but every challenge was proof that she was capable. Daniel continued to visit often, helping when he could, but Emily insisted on standing on her own 2 feet. "I need to do this myself," she told him one evening as she balanced her daughter in her arms. Daniel simply nodded, respect shining in his eyes. "I know," he replied softly, "and you're doing it beautifully." But Emily's transformation wasn't only about survival. It was about reclaiming her identity. She began drawing again, something she hadn't touched since marrying Ryan. Late at night, while her daughter slept, Emily sketched images of hope. Flowers breaking through cracks in concrete, a mother shielding her child from a storm, a woman rising from the ashes. Each stroke of the pencil felt like stitching her soul back together. One afternoon, she showed Daniel a few of her drawings. His eyes widened. "Emily, these are incredible. Have you ever thought about displaying them?" She laughed nervously. "Me? No one would want to see my work." "Don't say that," Daniel insisted. "Your art has heart. It tells a story, and people need to see it." For the first time, Emily considered it. Maybe her story could inspire others. Maybe her pain could become something more than scars. It could become strength for those still trapped in silence. As the weeks turned into months, whispers about Ryan's downfall reached her ears. Sophia had drained him of everything, leaving him drowning in debt and disgrace. The man who once belittled her, who nearly destroyed her, was now a hollow shell of himself. But Emily didn't celebrate his collapse. Instead, she focused on building a future worth living. Standing in front of the mirror one morning, holding her daughter close, Emily finally recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. She was powerful, resilient, and unafraid. And soon she would face Ryan again, not as his victim, but as the woman who had risen beyond him. The courthouse was packed again, but this time the air was different. Reporters lined the steps outside, microphones flashing as they whispered about Ryan Miller's scandal. Once praised as a rising gallery owner, he now stood as a man disgraced, his reputation crumbling before the entire town. Inside, Emily sat quietly with Daniel beside her. Her daughter was safe with a trusted neighbor, giving Emily the strength to focus on the battle ahead. She smoothed her skirt, steadying her breath. She wasn't here as a broken wife anymore. She was here as a mother seeking justice. Ryan entered the courtroom with slumped shoulders, his once proud stride reduced to a shuffle. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He looked older, defeated, a shadow of the man Emily had once loved. Sophia Reed wasn't with him. She had abandoned him weeks earlier, taking his gallery and his investors with her. The judge called the case to order. This time, it wasn't only about abuse, it was about financial fraud, neglect, and the full extent of Ryan's betrayal. Witnesses testified one after another. vendors unpaid, contracts manipulated, debts buried under lies. The gallery that had once been Ryan's dream was now a mountain of evidence against him. Daniel's voice rang through the courtroom as he presented the case. Ryan Miller not only failed as a husband and father, he declared, but he also deceived this community. He abandoned his responsibilities, chose deceit over loyalty, and inflicted violence on the very woman who stood by him. Justice demands accountability. Ryan tried to defend himself. His voice cracked as he muttered excuses, blaming Sophia for manipulating him, blaming stress, blaming everything but himself. But the jury's faces were unmoved. They had seen the photographs, heard Emily's trembling testimony, and now listened to the mountain of evidence stacking against him. Finally, it was Emily's turn. She stood tall, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. "I once believed Ryan would be the man to protect me and our child. Instead, he nearly destroyed us. I am not here for vengeance. I am here because no woman, no child, should ever live in fear. And today I ask this court to protect us and to hold him accountable for what he's done." The courtroom fell silent. Emily returned to her seat, her heart pounding, but she felt lighter. She had spoken her truth without tears, without fear. When the verdict came, the words echoed like thunder. Guilty. Ryan's face crumpled as the judge listed the charges: assault, fraud, negligence. He would lose not only his freedom for years to come, but also any claim to the child he had endangered. Emily closed her eyes, relief washing over her. The chains of fear that had bound her for so long finally shattered. Daniel placed a supportive hand on her shoulder, and, for the first time, she allowed herself to breathe freely. Ryan was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed. The man who once tried to control everything had lost it all. Justice had finally been served, but Emily's journey was not finished yet. The courthouse steps glistened under the afternoon sun as Emily Parker stepped outside. The trial was over, the verdict delivered, and Ryan Miller was no longer a threat to her or her child. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, but Emily kept her head high. She didn't need to speak to them. Her truth had already been spoken where it mattered most. Daniel Hayes walked beside her, shielding her from the crowd. "You don't owe them anything," he murmured. Emily nodded. "I know. I just want to go home." Home. For the first time in a long time, that word carried peace instead of pain. Weeks later, life began to settle into a rhythm. Emily returned to her small apartment, where her daughter's laughter filled the rooms with light. The nursery walls, once bare, now held Emily's own sketches, symbols of resilience, hope, and rebirth. Each drawing told a piece of her journey: a mother cradling her child, a woman walking away from shadows, a flower blooming against the odds. Daniel visited often, helping when he could, but more than that, he simply stood by her. He never pushed, never demanded. He respected her pace, her space, and her healing. Slowly, Emily realized that what she felt around him wasn't just gratitude. It was safety. It was trust, something she thought she could never feel again. One evening, as they watched her daughter take her first unsteady steps across the living room, Emily felt tears well in her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but of joy. "We made it," she whispered to her little girl. "We really made it." The past still lingered in fragments: Ryan's anger, Sophia's cruelty, the loneliness of those dark nights, but they no longer controlled her. They were scars, yes, but scars that told a story of survival. Emily began to share her art beyond the walls of her home. With Daniel's encouragement, she displayed her sketches at a local community center. To her surprise, people connected with them deeply. Women came to her afterward, some in tears, saying her drawings reflected their own struggles. For the first time, Emily realized her pain had become something more. It had become a voice for others, still trapped in silence. One night, standing before her small but growing audience, Emily spoke. "I thought I was powerless. I thought love meant staying quiet, even when it hurt. But I was wrong. Love should never come with bruises or fear. And if anyone here feels trapped the way I once did, know this: you are not alone. You can rise again." Applause filled the room, but what filled Emily's heart was something greater: purpose. Back at home, she held her daughter close, whispering softly, "Your mommy is strong now, strong enough for both of us." Outside the window, the world was quiet, peaceful. The storm had passed. Ryan was gone, Sophia forgotten. What remained was Emily, rebuilt, unbroken, and free. Her story was no longer one of betrayal and pain, but of survival, strength, and the unshakable love of a mother who refused to give up. So that's it, my dear friends. The story has come to a close. And if you're still here with me at this very moment, it means something in Emily's journey touched your heart in a way words alone cannot explain. Maybe it's her courage, maybe it's her quiet strength, or maybe it's the reminder that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Emily's pain became her strength, and that can be true for us too. Life will hand us betrayal, heartbreak, even storms we think we cannot survive. But as Epictetus taught, you may fetter my leg, but not even Zeus himself can overpower my free will. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel so we can keep walking through these powerful stories together. You are not alone.